Today I'm sharing 3 tops I've made with one pattern in different fabrics, and it's McCall 7093. I'll show you the muslin, fit, and lots of sewing goodness. So keep watching. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina. This is Lifting Pins and Needles, a channel all about sewing, limitless sewing. Welcome, and if you're new to the channel and love to sew, here you will find a lot of sewing content, and it is my goal with every single video that you take something practical for your own sewing. Today the sewing project I really enjoyed was made using a Big 4 pattern, McCall 7093. It is a pattern that is still in print, and I've always loved it. Once Vivian from Stitches and Seams asked me, because she was in Joann's I believe, what pattern do you want? I immediately had this one saved in my phone, and so she kindly sent this one to me along with many others last year. So I always knew I wanted to make it. I just love the style. UA, it's got some slits on the front that I decided not to sew. All these views actually use the same pattern pieces. The only thing that varies is the shape and length of the hems, and then for the raglan sleeves, the length of the sleeve. So it's not like there's different pattern pieces. This raglan sleeve is gold. I love a woven raglan sleeve. They're very hard to find. I don't know why they don't draft many more, and then they just look really nice. And yeah, it's a nice type of sleeve that I love to sew, and the fact that it's for woven with light to medium weight for all the fabrics that I love make this pattern really cool. So on the back here it says crepe de chine, chamouse, chiffon, georgette. I used for my versions viscose, this one, and the one tucked in behind that I'll show you later, and for the one here on the front is made out of crepe, very thin crepe I would say, color blocked. So there is color blocking options available because of design lines. Although my body measurements put me in a size 20 for this pattern, I went into the pattern and looked at the finished garment measurements printed on the pattern. I chose to do a size 18 based on those measurements and the ease that I wanted, considering that this type of design needs to be loose and flowy. You can't have a really tight fitting garment with these design lines, and especially with this type of fabric. Crepe de chine, all these fabrics, they won't hold the stress of a seam that's close fitting to your body, that when you move is going to be stretching and things like that. They will just start ripping apart. Over time I have had comments and questions in other videos of how I do flat pattern measurements and how do I determine what size to choose, and this is something I do routinely with every single project I do. I don't really think about it, I just get my tape measure and do it. So I thought I'd show you how to do that in a little bit more detail for this project. So in Up Close and So Personal you will see that. You also see how the muslin fits. This is actually the muslin right here. So it turned out very wearable. A few modifications I made to the shoulder dart, the neckline, and then really cool sewing construction with a lot of reasoning behind I do certain things that are not done the way the pattern suggested. But it's just different viewpoints, different ways of construction, and I'm showing you mine. So I hope you enjoy it, and that's coming up next. What I've done to all the pattern pieces is draw the stitching line. So the seam allowance for these patterns is 5/8 of an inch. So I had gone and drawn that on the outline of all the patterns so that I knew where I would actually sew this. So I have actually pinned pattern pieces together on the stitching line and sort of assembled half of this pattern so I can take flat measurements. The shape of this pattern, because it's quite loose and boxy, makes it super easy to be able to do that because there's no darts and things. So the blue one there is the front. This one that is the actual pattern piece is like the side panel that's inserted, that, you know, optional color blocking and things. And actually this pattern piece is the same for all the sizes, so it doesn't vary with the sizes, and that's why I just cut it out on the outline. For the other ones, I did trace out my size, and this white one here is the back. So I have gone and pinned this on the stitching line, like pretending this is how it's going to be sewn. And there are reference marks on the pattern. That circle with a cross there, it marks the bust line. That one there marks the waist, and it actually says waistline. And down here on this pattern piece is the hip. These have finished garment measurements on the pattern pieces, so I decided to just measure them across to confirm. So it says here that the finished measurement for size 18 for the hip should be 48.5 inches. So I'm just going to flatten this out as much as I can. And because I've just got half the garment here, I'm expecting to find 24.25 inches across here. So the front and the back are cut on the fold. So what do I get? Exactly 24.25 inches. So this measurement is super accurate. At the waist, it says that the finished garment measurement is 45. So I'm going to measure across, and I'm hoping to find 22.5. And that's exactly what I find. And at the bust here on the top, here it says it's 44.5 finished. So I'm going to measure from one side to the other, and I have 22.25 inch there, exactly. So actually the finished garment measurements printed on this particular pattern are really exact. You can see on this part of the arm side where the raglan sleeve will be attached, how I've drawn the stitching line there at 5/8 of an inch. So I went around the whole pattern and drew that, and down this line here, and that's how I was able to pin them together with a 5/8 seam allowance. If I hadn't have pinned this all together, I would have to measure from the stitching line there to the edge, take that measurement and then add it to this one here, and then calculate. And if you don't mark your stitching line, then you would have to measure from the edge to there and subtract your seam allowance, which can be confusing. So just draw it, just take the time and draw your stitching line. It'll make measurements much easier. This is my wearable toile. I just made it up, no modifications to the pattern. I always knew the neckline was going to be high, but I'd rather just make the modifications with the garment on. The way the neckline is finished with bias binding makes it super easy to adjust after the fact. Now everything's fine except for these darts here on the shoulder. You can see that they come up here and they just poke out like that. I think they don't follow the shape of my shoulder, or they're just drafted too straight. It looks really bad. So on this side, I have pinned it and extended it and sort of curved it a little bit. I am gonna try and base this on by hand and try it on to see if I get like a smoother curve here on the shoulder. Otherwise, for a raglan woven sleeve, I think I have great mobility, and yeah, I like the length. This is a short sleeve, and everything here doesn't pull, like it's very comfortable. On the back as well, I feel I can move really well. So the neckline, I have a pin right there. I am going to drop it. They have you sew the binding on with 5/8 seam allowance. I don't like that. So whatever I decide is this height that I want, I'm just going to add 1/4 inch seam allowance to that neckline. I will be disregarding the pattern piece to make the neckline binding. I'm just going to make my own with the bias tape makers that I like and that I use, and that's what I'm going to do about the neckline. Otherwise, it's really good. I'm happy to use nicer fabric for this pattern now. So I've just tried this on, and you can see the pin that I marked for where I wanted my neckline height to be when I put it on myself, and those pins sort of go there. So I just placed my pattern on top of that, matching my stitching line that I marked with pencil earlier to my actual stitching line that I sewed, because when I overlocked, I trimmed part of that seam allowance. So if I put this right there, the line matches there, right there. And so you can see that's where my pin is. And I played around with a few lines to create the curve that I wanted. At first I did one that was more V-ish looking, but then decided no, I want it wider to the side and then to come up there. And I just used this really basic ruler to find the curve that I liked, and that's the one. The important thing about necklines is that at the middle there, where this is going to be on the fold, there needs to be quite a flat area there, a good 5/8 of an inch straight across, and then the curve starts. And then with green, you see the seam allowance, I have left myself at 1/4 of an inch. I won't be modifying all this back seam allowance. I don't really mind just sewing the binding on with 1/4 of an inch, although the seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. I mainly care about how low it comes on this front area, so I'm not going to be modifying that. I really hope you can see this shoulder dart. Basically, the original shape starts from the neckline and finishes right there. And then I had this pokey bit right there that looked really bad. So what I did was start before the dart finishes, like an inch, and then from there just start curving in the shape of my shoulder. And that extends the dart for about an inch, so now it stops around there, whereas before it stopped there and it was just sort of like straight across. I think this shape is what matches me, and I need to transfer this onto my pattern piece so that the next versions I make are already corrected and I don't have to do this every time. This was just pinning it on myself, putting this with the seam out so I could easily pin that little shape onto me like I showed you in the Fit Muslin clip. These are all the views available for this pattern, and I've chosen view A. That's the front, and that's how the back looks with that little curved hem. But I am not going to do those little slits on the front. I'm just going to sew that seam closed. All the views use the same pattern pieces. The only thing that differs is the shape of the hem and the length. This one's longer, and this one uses the same sleeve piece but just longer. But due to my weather and preferences, this is what I'm going for. The diagrams are so helpful, and this is a very simple top to put together, although it looks more complicated than it actually is. This is the front pattern piece, just opened up after it's been cut on the fold, and these lateral panels have notches. So there's 2 notches there to match on the front, and those are the ones that get sewn on first with the 5/8 seam allowance. So this is my front that's been cut on the fold. These are my lateral panels that I've decided to do in black. Here are the notch marks I have in white chalk there and red friction pen on this fabric. Those double notches will match the back side, but first these ones need to be matched and sewn there. Straight seam there, straight seam there. This looks really funny, but it's not wrong. And I showed you that the top bits were funny, but actually when you put them right sides together, the panel follows the shape of the front piece. You can see like that, and you can see the stitching line there at 5/8 of an inch. So I've done that straight stitch there. I've shown you the corner, the detail, how it looks. And now this seam needs to be serged, and the seams pressed to the center of the garment, so this way. Once that's finished, I can just attach the back one to this bit there and then sew it onto there. Okay, this is showing the seam that I united. The front and the back is open, and that's because they have the slits going on there, but I'm not doing that. So what I have done is actually just serge the seam together. You can see it's been overlocked on the edge. I've trimmed some of that 5/8 seam allowance. It's now at 3/8 seam allowance, less bulky. And on this curve there, you always want a smaller seam allowance. It just presses better. As the diagram shows, the back pattern piece there is on the bottom, and the top one is on top of it, right sides together. So you can see that they're together there. The print sort of blends into each other, but here's the front and the backs there. They're right sides together, and there's a double notch there from the front, or this front bit there, that will match a double notch right there that I've marked in friction pens. I'm just going to line these up, and then it's just simple as doing 2 side seams there and there. I should have stay stitched this neckline before starting to put this together, so actually I'm going to do that now. I'm going to stay stitch the front and stay stitch the back to prevent that from stretching out, and then I'm going to go and sew these 2 straight seams. I've sewn the side seams there, and you can see that the side that had already the panel on it with the seam pressed that way, this seam here catches it, and there's like a little intersection there, that little point. When you look at the top, that's how it's going to look. That is the arm side area where the sleeve is going to go, and then a little bit down further comes this. So it's really nice and neat. So this raw edge I need to serge and then press it towards the center of the back. So when you look at the top from the inside, this black panel was just going to be fully extended. On the top here you have necklines, the front and the back, and I have stay stitched them as I said. Now the instructions have you stay stitch at a later date, and it's actually after you've put the sleeve in here, then stay stitch, but actually that's like at the end of the project when you've manipulated this and your thing would have been already distorted. So I'd rather just do that now. I should have done it actually as the first step, but I did it soon enough. The raglan sleeves have this shape that you cut out, and then this is the stitching line, and that's clearly marked on the pattern. And there are the double notches to match the back side and the single to match the front. So this part just needs to be put together there, and this considers a 5/8 seam allowance. But remember, I wanted to extend my dart because when I made the muslin it looked really funny on me, so I'm just gonna do that by hand here, and it was roughly that adjustment. So about 1 inch from the tip of the dart there, I start curving it in more and extending that dart for like 1 inch down. And the white there, that is the stitching line I'm going to do to close this shoulder dart for the sleeve and for the other one too. After sewing that shoulder dart closed, I have serged and trimmed off excess there. As you can see, I have pushed the dart towards the back part of the sleeve, and the back is where the double notches are, so that's where it's gone. And I have stay stitched this top part that will be part of the neckline. I have gone ahead and done this seam, and the sleeve is complete. I have also serged that, and now this raglan sleeve will go attached to the blouse. Here is the top, wrong sides up. As you can see, the seams there, there's that intersection there. This is the back, this is the front. You can see the seam is going this way, the seam is going that way. And because here the seam is going towards the back, I have put the seam of the sleeve towards the front, so it's less bulky in that area right there. Then there are notches to match. Double notch here matches the double notch there of the sleeve. I've got them right sides together, and then that goes up to the top. And then on the other side, you've got the single notch right there that matches the single notch there, and then it goes up to the top. So once this seam is done like that, then all the neckline on the top has been finished. You can see I've stay stitched this first and there, and then I've stay stitched that, and I think it's going to be much more protected than if I just waited until after I'd done everything and then did the whole stay stitching all around the neckline. So the sleeve has been sewn on there, you can see, and I need to serge this, and that's how it looks. See, raglan sleeve. The neckline is complete now, and I've already stay stitched at this stage, but this is when the pattern says to stay stitch. After doing all that, I think by then the neckline will already be stretched out and distorted. But anyway, this is close to being done. I have to serge these and then press the seams towards the sleeve like that, and then finish the neckline. I'm just going to use bias binding and then hem the sleeves and hem the bottom. I hope that was fun to watch. As you can see, the order of events that the pattern suggests to construct this garment, I don't really agree with, especially in the stabilizing the neckline bit. That was sort of left to the very end. I also don't like that they give you a pattern piece to make bias binding, but then have you attach that onto the neckline with a 5/8 seam allowance, and then trimming and then turning. I just find it really fiddly. I used my own self-made bias tape, and that's what I did for this version. But for these viscose ones, I used my own store-bought bias tape that I have a lot of, for projects like this. This, I don't know what it is, leopard print or cow print, but it's very little, mainly white, sort of sheer, and I opted to do the same type of crepe for the sleeves, but in black. So those are the sleeves. Of course, I'm doing the short sleeve option. If you like longer sleeves, you can just do them long. The pattern piece is the same, you just cut it at a different line. And I love that the panels for color blocking are part of the front. This starts there at the tip, but it goes slanted towards the front, and I think it has a really nice visual effect. I like the hem that is shorter in the front. These sleeves, when you cut them and it's like really curved like that to follow the shape of your arm like that. So it's not like a straight line. That means that hemming it on that curve is a little bit tricky. The fact that they suggest a narrow hem with a 5/8 hem allowance, I don't think that's narrow. I mean, for me, a narrow hem is really narrow. And those are the types of hems that actually will cope with the curve of the shape. So that's why I have serged and just folded and sewn very narrow, like super narrow. And I've done that for all the 3 tops that I've made. For the bottom of this specific one, because it's crepe and sheer, I folded twice to get that result there. I swapped my threads, so on this front bit it's white, going onto the panel there it's black. Swapping again there, and I did the same with the bias binding on the neckline. Swapped the color threads, white there, black there, and then, you know. And these are things you can take your time to do when you're sewing at home to have something look really nice. You'll never find something factory made that they do the color swap, because that just takes time. I mean, not that it takes lots of time, it'll take you like 1 minute, but in a factory setting they're not going to do that. They're just going to hem all around with one color. The length of it is sort of, it goes below my bottom, and for a flowy top like that I think it's okay. I would wear it with something fitted, a skirt or trousers, so I think it's okay. This is the second one, and this one's turned inside out so you can see it. So you can see the seams there. I have trimmed all the seam allowances to 3/8 when I serge them. Seam allowance for these are always 5/8, and I think those are too thick, like to leave on these curves like raglan sleeves. There you can clearly see how narrow my hem is on the sleeve and on the bottom. So for this viscose one, or rayon like you like to call it, I just serged and folded up and top stitched. I think rayon copes really well with sewing and pressing, and I think usually if you take your time to do a narrow hem, it'll turn out well with a machine. You know, sometimes I do hand hem, it just depends on my mood. And I actually sewed on the neckline with the machine. That means I can sew the hem with the machine. The difference with this one is that I didn't have enough fabric to do the whole length, so I don't have the curved hem at the bottom. This is just like a straight across, so it's still longish. It still hits, you know, mid-hip, so it's still fine. It just doesn't have the shape of the original version. Now, this is a type of style that wouldn't be that easy to lengthen into a full dress because of the panel on the front. I think it would take a little bit of work to tweak. Yeah. So this is how this one looks. I think the print is super interesting. The fabric was like that. It had part of the fabric with the motif in a wider sort of blown up print, and then smaller on the other side. And so I placed that area of separation there between the both styles on the fold, and that's where I cut my front and my back. And I think it looks really cool. I also wanted a bit of contrast here on the raglan sleeve, so where I have the smaller type print, I have a bigger print there on the sleeve, and the opposite here where it's bigger, I have it smaller right there. They have the feel of a t-shirt, but just a little bit more dressed up, and I would just pop these on and go out and feel super comfortable and super fresh, especially in this rayon. Okay, I've switched tops so I can show you the one I was wearing. This is my very, very wearable muslin or toile that I did. It's made out of scraps. I had a tiny amount of the print one, and then I just used a scrap of solid color rayon. So it's all rayon, it's all the same, just made out of scraps. I did the panels here with the navy blue, and at the bottom I didn't have enough either to do the full length hem for the bottom, so I sort of pieced this part there and put a little bit of solid navy on the back just to make the full pattern piece. On another topic, I wanted to give you a heads up that Itch to Stitch is having a 5-year anniversary sale, 20% off. The coupon code is right here on the screen. So if you have liked projects I've made from Itch to Stitch in the past and have been waiting for a sale to get them for a bit less, now is a chance to get them. I will leave all the information below. Okay, so here you can see the one that I have shortened. If you hear crackling on the floor, there's lots of like dry leaves. So the length is good, the fit is good, it's nice and roomy but not huge. This is sizing one size down from what the pattern says. So it doesn't cover my bottom, it's just mid-hip, and I think it's perfect like that. I like the length of the sleeve, and I'll show you the next one. Here is the muslin. I really like this one. I was careful to not get a big huge rose right on the apex. There is a rose here, but it's above, like on my upper chest, so that's fine. And you can see the length there covers my bottom. I think it's really nice, and yeah, I just love this one too, and I'm so glad that this muslin worked out. This is the more special one, the one that I love the most, made out of crepe. It's slightly sheer, but not that sheer. I'm using my skin color undergarment, and that's how it looks on the side. On the back, I really like this one. I'll show you the neckline with this one. You can see I've lowered a little bit. If I'd left the original, it would have been like up there touching my collarbone. I think that's just too high for me. There's no gaping or anything anywhere. So the top stitching was good, and you can see I got a good shape of the shoulder dart for my shoulder after I adapted it, because it was like really straight up there and pokey. It was really ugly. So just minor tweaks that these patterns need always to adjust to our shape. I love the way that it looks fitted, but actually I can move really well and I have great mobility, and that doesn't always happen with woven raglan sleeves, you know. This pattern is still in print. As far as I know, it's on the website, so if you see it around and have looked at it before and thought, you know, I highly recommend it. It's a really nice pattern. It's a really nice woven tee with something extra, and I think you could make it look however you want to with different types of fabric. Now I have a thought of making all this front and back with a panel of woven like eyelet, and then doing the sleeves and the panels with thinner sort of knit fabric. I had that idea just this morning. Didn't get to materialize it, of course. It's already made 3. But I think I will give that option a go. I think it would be totally possible. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you liked the video. If you did, like, share, comment, subscribe, tap the bell, all those things, and I will see you on Friday with a really cool sewing video. Bye.